Good evening, Browns fans, and welcome to OBR Weekly. It's 7 o'clock. It's Wednesday. It's time for us to show up. That, right over there, that fellow's the legend, Mr. Freddie Greetham. How you doing, Fred?
Doing good. Ready to
Yes.
go.
All right, let's get into it. I'm Barry, by the way. I'm the web dork of the OBR. Before we get going, the usual disclaimer. This show is really powered by your comments and questions in the chat room. If you're watching us on Twitter or X or Zitter or whatever, do yourself a favor and head on over to the YouTube chat room. We have lots of good questions, and we have a lot of good interaction with the chat room throughout the show. So please feel free to hang out. I am told that my mic volume is too high, so I've just turned it down. Fred, we don't have to talk about what's going to happen in the draft any longer. Is that?
Are we going to talk about Bill Belichick and his girlfriend?
If you want to, I mean, if the chat room has questions about it,
then figured if we ran out of topics, you're always worried about running out of topics. I don't think we're going to run out of topics, though.
I don't think so. I don't think we are today. Especially not if the chat room delivers in terms of questions and comments and so forth. So let's review this NFL draft. Starting with this this trade apparently that was made, the Browns stealing away the number 2 pick, which turned into Travis Hunter for the number 4 pick, next year's number 1 pick. Number 5 pick, you're right. Next year's number 1 pick from Jacksonville, and a whole variety of goodies. Is this a trade you would have done, Fred?
Just step away a little bit. It makes sense to me. I mean, all along the Browns trying to admit that they, are not rebuilding. They're not resetting. They need a piece or two, to go to the playoffs. But they kind of admitted a little bit, I think, by doing this, that the more practical move was to get more players that can fill more positions. And, I mean, I think the way it was done, Andrew Berry, is pretty straightforward. And I was trying to understand his angle about praising Travis Hunter so much, in the last press conference, comparing him to Ohtani and thinking that, okay, he's either trying to get the Titans to take Hunter so he can take Cam Ward, or if they take Cam Ward, then it doesn't matter what he says, he's going to take Hunter because he's there. My reasoning is, how do you not take Shohei Ohtani if you're like, if that's who he is from football, and you're sitting there and all it takes is a draft pick. You don't have to fork out $700 million or whatever. But then So you kind of get the expectations there, and then you get a trade and you kind of go from a unicorn to a wrestler. And but when you look, you only went down 3 picks, and you got the 36th pick in the draft, Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State, and you got the 4th round pick, which they took Dylan Sampson, SEC Offensive Player of the Year, 2 top of the line running backs. And by the way, you get the 1st round pick of the Jaguars next year, who could have a bad year, and it could be a top 10 pick. It seems like a pretty good haul, but to me, it seems like they were signaling they're going to go for the quarterback all in next year. Well, then they drafted 2 quarterbacks. So all said and done at the time, I wasn't that thrilled with it because to me, it was signaling wait till next year. Yeah. But I cannot argue with the haul they got. And I'm assuming Judkins is going to be a great back. I'm assuming Sampson's going to be a great back. And I think, you look at, if you remember when the Browns took Joe Thomas in 2007, third overall. Everybody knew it was a great pick,
Mm-hmm.
but there was no sizzle. All the
Right.
sizzle was the trade up to get Brady Quinn, who
Right.
wasn't really much of a player. But Joe Thomas, 10 straight Pro Bowls and straight to the Hall of Fame. Mason Graham was considered the fourth best player in the draft. So instead of getting the first or second, you got the fourth. But I think expectations were here, and you didn't get the skill player on offense. That was my biggest disappointment. But I kind of waited for the whole thing to play out.
Right.
And there was a time I had Shadur Sanders as the pick at 2. Up in my 8th projection out of 11, because it seemed like I didn't know how they ranked him compared to Ward. So when you look at that, you got a guy, just because he slid down, everybody's talking him down. Maybe you got your franchise quarterback there, or maybe you got him in Dave Gabriel. But if you don't, the next year you're set up to go all in. We talk about it again.
Right. And we really learn in 2026 how good this trade was, with the Cleveland Browns having 2 first-round draft picks, potential to trade up if there's somebody they really want, or stay where they are and get 2 quality players, 2 potential starters for this team. So I'm with you, Fred. I think it was a pretty good deal. If you look at most of the grades of the deal, both the Jaguars and the Browns got pretty high marks for it. It wasn't like one side ripped off the other, as was the case with some other trades that were made on the first night of the draft. Just really a good case of both teams getting what they wanted. So let's talk about the picks. We've got some other questions coming in, and please keep hitting us up with the questions. We will get to them. But pick number 1, Mason Graham. Big fella, about 300 pounds, from that school up north. But despite...
You got a typo in there.
no, I don't. Despite coming from that school we won't mention up north, he was a full first-team All-American, first-team All-Big Ten, 45 tackles, 7 tackles for loss with 3.5 sacks, and the pass broken up. Stats don't really jump off the chart at you, but the tape really does. This guy is a run stuffer like nobody's business, and something the Browns really need, right, Fred?
You know more than I do. If you watch that Ohio State-Michigan game the last 2 years, why did they lose, especially this year? Because for whatever reason, they tried to ram the ball right down the throat of Michigan, and they couldn't do it instead of passing on him. And why was that? Because of that guy right there.
Right.
I wasn't that familiar with his name or Kenneth Grant, but those 2 guys were high draft picks. But this was the cream of the crop in the run stoppers. And for the life of me or you, we could not figure out, why did the Buckeyes try to just keep running it at the interior of the Michigan defense? Well, I think he's going to really be good next to Myles Garrett, and I think that will help Myles Garrett. But I think Mike Hall and Mason Graham, now there's irony too. The Buckeye and the Wolverine side by side, your future defensive tackles, both inside pass rushers. I think it could really be pretty good. We talked about the defense. If the Browns could just get their defense tweaked and back to how it was in 23, where they were in fact, they were number 1. If they could get in the top 10 again, or even top 5, then the offense just has to, have a little bit of more than last year. I mean, 15 points a game, they ought to be able to get up to 18 to 20. And if your defense is playing like they were in 23, you have a chance to win a lot of games.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that adding Graham to this front 4 with Hall, McGuire or whoever, the rotation at the other end, and this is Myles Garrett fellow, you think this makes the Browns the best front 4 in the AFC North?
I don't know about that. If the Bengals lose Hendrickson, that could make a difference, obviously. But, you love thinking about Abdul Carter. And for the life of me, I really thought when they had that 33rd pick, there was a lot of really good edge rushers there that were rated as first round picks, like the guy from Boston College and, different ones. And they didn't take one in the draft. So they must really be counting on Isaiah McGuire and, Okoronkwo to be back and, Alex Wright to return and the new guy, Joe Tryon. And, other than that, I don't know if they're the best, but they got to get the production. I would really like them to bring back Zadarius Smith. I mean, he's sitting out there. I think he's about the only nameable free agent edge rusher. He was second on the team in edge rushing last year, and he only played half the season because he spent the rest of the season with the Lions. I think he had 5.5 sacks with the Browns before he was traded, and he finished second. I don't know what he had with the Lions, but I think he was up close to 10. Why not bring him back? And even with the wink idea, Z will do it again. If we're not in it, we'll trade you to another team, that has a chance to win down the stretch if need be.
Right. So, a formidable defensive line. And as World's Fastest points out, Mason Graham was maybe held back a little as a pass rusher in Michigan because of the nature of that defense. And very effective run stuffer, we know. But we'll get to see what happens when he's turned loose a little bit more in the Schwartz defense. But obviously a big improvement to the team, and that improvement on defense continues with the next selection, which was Carson Schlesinger of UCLA, 22-year-old, 6'2", 242 linebacker, first-team All-American again, first-team All-Big Ten again, led the FBS with 90 solo tackles, ranked third with 136 total tackles, 10 TFLs, 4 sacks, good numbers. This guy's a tackling machine, isn't he, Fred?
Yeah, again, I think it's one of the things that's strange about this draft is because we know they're run by analytics, but analytics has a low priority on linebacker and a low priority on running backs, thinking you can get a running back whenever you want, you can get linebacker whenever you want, as evidence what they've done. The biggest move they made at linebacker was obviously trading up to get JOK, and they drafted him at number 52 overall. And this guy was taken 33rd overall, the first pick in the second round. And so, according to the Daniel Jeremiah, who I respect a lot, his rankings, he only had 2 linebackers, and I'm talking about pure linebackers. Some guys are edge rushers, but they're listed as linebacker. But he had him as the 40th overall best player. And the top one was Jihad Campbell, who went high. He was like 10th or 15th. So I think the Browns looked at it and go, we like this guy. We got to get him now because there's nobody else. And then came back, to get somebody else. So it's a strange that it was a linebacker. I don't really think it has anything to do with JOK unless they think he can play that position. This guy is more of the Jordan Hicks position. Jordan Hicks is the green dot, the middle linebacker, and he's 32. He was all right, pretty good last year, but he was injured a lot. This guy, and Hicks is back for the final year, I think, and this guy, I think, will take over, but maybe he can also do some of the JOK stuff if he's not able to start the season or even play this season. So the more I look at this, it makes sense. Again, looking at availability, like I said, there was only 2 linebackers and Campbell was gone quick. So this was the only guy that was in striking distance at that position. And in looking at 6 of the 7 picks were rated in the top 68 overall by NFL.com. That's pretty good. The only one that wasn't was Gabriel, and he was 148th, So we'll see. I mean, if he can play sideline to sideline, I guess the one down would be he only had this 1 year. He was a walk-on, and he worked his way up through special teams, and then he had this breakout season this year, but it was only 1 year. So, the Browns seemed to go away a little from analytics and went by more what these guys did on the field. Like they were all productive players. Like Graham was a All-American, and Sampson was SEC Player of the Year, and we know what Judkins did, and Gabriel was like third in the Heisman, and Sanders, we know what he did. So it's maybe they went a little more with them as football players, and we'll see how it pans out. But yeah, I can't argue with the pick when you see, what was available.
You hit on a good point there, which is that Andrew Berry and company seemed to stray from the analytics, the strict analytics dictates when it came to that second round, picking up a linebacker. Obviously, they pick up Quinshon Judkins, a running back, again, not a high analytically valued position. And like you said, they're going after guys who produce on the field. Production for the Cleveland Browns draft picks was probably the best in the NFL, not necessarily their athletic rating, but the production, the numbers that they turned up was one of the best in the draft. And the thing that got me, Fred, was everybody was freaking out over these first couple of picks in the second round because they aren't what they expected, Andrew Berry to do. It's not typical. He should go after a wide receiver at this point, another position at this point. But then again, he would get criticized if he robotically followed the analytics dictates, It just seems like he broke from Cleveland Browns dogma and not getting a ton of credit for it.
Well, when he's drafted for 5 years, it hasn't exactly worked the way they've done it. I mean, he had 37 picks and one made the Pro Bowl, JOK. Now, some of that is you traded away 3 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson, so they're missing in there. Plus, there were some other picks higher in there that he traded away. Don't be lost in that. But it was away from not only analytics, but he had drafted an offensive lineman every year that he'd been here. Not this year. He had drafted a wide receiver every year that he'd been here. Not this year. And he had drafted a cornerback for the 5 years, including the last 4 years, not this year. So he definitely went away from his mantra. And it wasn't like the receivers or the corners or the offensive linemen he drafted were really home runs. So that was what kind of, fooled everybody. If you'd have told me they'd come out of here with 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, and a linebacker, and they only made 7 picks, I would have said, you're crazy. That's not at all what they do. They don't really. I was glad that he went after. I've been champion. I was championing, as the cause for Travion Henderson. But I said one of these 2. And I still would rather have Henderson than Judkins, even though I can't argue. I really think Henderson had a great year because he had Judkins, because he was healthy. The biggest problem with Henderson that I was frustrated in watching him the first 3 years, he was hurt all the time. He wasn't hurt this year because they had that dual threat. But then I look at Sampson, and he had a faster 40 time than Travion Henderson. So that lightning aspect could be Sampson and Judkins. So I like that. And that tells me they're going to get back to the roots, the run game, ground and pound. You get 2 great running backs. I'd like them to bring back Nick Chubb and if you have to, push comes to shove, go with him over Jerome Ford. If you didn't, you can get Chubb, I think, for less. You got to pay Ford like $3.5 million, or bring all 4 of them back and see how it goes if they're all healthy. But so I like that. I can't argue. If you play a rookie quarterback, run the ball. If you play Joe Flacco, run the ball, or Pickett, So there you go. I mean, yeah, I can see what they're doing. They still have holes to fill, though. I can't believe they didn't draft a safety. They never
Right.
signed one in the offseason yet. So they don't even have a starting safety unless Ronnie Hickman is it by default.
Right. Which at this point he probably would be. Bubble 13 wants to know Judkins over Henderson. You alluded to it, Fred. Talked about it a little bit. I was a big fan of Travion Henderson because I think he does everything well as a running back. But Quinshon Judkins, obviously very successful. And one of the things that Ty Sox brings out here is that the front office leaned toward high character, high production picks. And I would agree with that question that they did. Is this again a little bit of a shift from the past, Fred?
Well, I don't know who they could have taken or considered. I mean, the only one that I'm familiar is Mike Green, and he went to, of course, the Ravens.
Mm-hmm.
There were other ones, but no, I think they really do try to get good players that are also good people. I've been around a lot of these guys, and those I've got to know that they've drafted have been pretty good quality, at least as far as I can tell. I was glad not to get it's a circus, and it still could be a circus, with Sanders,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what it is, just because of the attention. But, Johnny Manziel and, some of the ones in the past that they didn't do maybe as much diligence, not this regime, but I like that. I like to trend more to higher character, quality people. Phil Savage told me when he was here that the research showed the high character, more moral type individuals tend to do better in the NFL. And, I don't know any statistic, to point to on it or people he drafted because of that. But so personally, I think it's a good thing. It's less to worry about, to some degree. You got enough problems with some guys anyway.
Now, one of the things that we went through, after that 3-14 season, was a lot of criticism of Andrew Berry and of Stefanski. Obviously, coming off a bad season, you expect there to be a ton of criticism, but a lot of people were calling for Andrew Berry's head. I was never excited about that notion because I could just see Andrew Berry as a guy learning on the Cleveland Browns' dime and then going elsewhere and doing very, very well, as he climbed that learning curve as a GM. Do you think we're seeing growth out of Andrew Berry? Do you think we're seeing sort of a maturation of our personnel staff?
Yeah, well, that's, any job you get better and better the more you do it. And I think he's 37, 38 years old, something like that, in his 6 years GM now. And yeah, he's made some mistakes. I think the draft part of it is a big part of it, especially now getting the first round picks back, that maybe hopefully he learned and their evaluation process learned, because you got to start hitting on these picks every year. The reason the Steelers are always competitive and the Ravens are always competitive and the Bengals, because they hit on their picks, even though they draft at the end of the draft. They get guys. The Steelers are notorious for letting their young guys leave when they become free agents, and they have somebody you never heard of go in there and they become a Pro Bowler immediately. And the Ravens are kind of the same thing. So you want to get to that point. If you're going to build through the draft, you got to get the draft picks right. And especially with this team, you got to hit on 4 or 5 of these guys, and you got to get contributions immediately from them. You can't just hope that they're good down the road. You got to get some immediate production from them that can help you this year. And I think Graham's that guy. I think running back is a position that it's a quicker learning curve, because we've seen a lot of rookies in the NFL, have an impact right out of the bat. And I think even the Schlesinger pick, he can be an impact player, So the top 3 or 4 picks really need to contribute, and that will ultimately point to the faith and trust that Andrew Berry knows what he's doing. I think he's good, and I pointed this out many times, at trades, because you can evaluate a guy who's already playing in the NFL and say that guy's really good, and you could get him in a trade if you're willing to pay the big money or the contract. That was the problem why the other team, with Amari Cooper. I mean, I could have told you he's a good player, but the contract, and Jimmy Haslam's been able to, is willing to pay for them, and Barry's good at renegotiating or structuring them to get them in the salary cap. And we saw that with Jerry Jeudy. Now he's got to get the next level and hit on the free agents, but more importantly, hit on the draft picks.
Right. Well, speaking of Andrew Berry and his continuing support from Jimmy Haslam, one of the theories that's been floated around, here presented by Rocky Balboa, is that Haslam is the man behind the Sanders selection. A couple of reasons for this. One is, the second quarterback choice might be a little curious, and the other is that, Stefanski and Berry didn't look excited when they took, on the draft cameras, right? So it looked like they were grumpy about something. Do you have any reason to believe that Jimmy Haslam is being meddlesome in the draft?
No. In fact, Stefanski and Berry both explained that wasn't live synced up, on the video, that there was a stagger in that. And so that you can't go by that. It's not like they don't want some talk to be picked up live, so they kind of delay it and make sure they edit or whatever. But it's my understanding and is that I think Haslam was involved in the aspect of Berry went to him and said, okay, we're in the area where we evaluated Shadur Sanders to be, whether that was the 3rd or 4th round or whatever it was. That would be the time, the value that we would make this pick, and I think they informed him, what was going on. He was right there in the whole process. So I don't think he said demand it, but they might have went to him and said, is that okay? Would that bring attention that you don't want to the Browns, type of a thing? Or is it something you want to bring attention? I don't think they'd ask him that, but I think it's kind of common that the guy signing the checks, is informed in the process.
Right.
He could have said, no, we don't want this. We've went through the Watson thing. We've went through the Manziel thing. We don't want this headache. As we've heard, many teams took Sanders off the board for that reason. And so I think it would make sense that you ask the owner, to sign off on that particular pick if he had any qualms and didn't want to do it. So I think it might be more to make sure it was okay with him, not that he's telling him to do it.
Right. Which makes total sense because of the media attention that Sanders is going to bring in and all that. You want to check with your boss, at some point about whether or not, he would agree with such a momentous decision. Everybody that we've heard from inside the organization is basically telling us that this originated with Andrew Berry. Is people from outside the organization, ex-Browns people like Eric Mangini the other day, saying that, I think that this was from Haslam or whatever. I think just like Andrew Berry is showing some signs of growth, so is Jimmy Haslam. Jimmy Haslam, I don't think, is nearly as meddlesome as he used to be, or nearly as sort of type A involved in trying to call the shots. At least that's what all the available evidence seems to indicate. So if this would just be another step.
If he was calling the shots and he really wanted Sanders, they would have taken him at 2, or
Yeah.
they would have taken him at 33. Like, can we take him now? Can we take him now? That type of a thing. And, as one of our, listeners pointed out, it was the 5th round. I mean, that's where you got DTR, and
Hmm.
so this isn't a big financial commitment. Yeah, you had other needs, but I don't know if you would have drafted or had any evidence that you would have had a star safety or a star wide receiver in the 5th round.
Right.
You know,
Right.
People will say, oh, there was this guy available or whatever. You usually don't get them. You can always have the Nakuas, the different ones in the 5th round or whatever, but there's a reason they're still available most of the time, and they generally don't, work out. We don't know what Jamari Thrash is going to do. He was drafted in the 5th round last year. Didn't really make much of an impact as a rookie. So, yeah, they had needs at wide receiver. They had needs at safety, a couple other places. But if Sanders is the quarterback that originally, if he is the second best quarterback, if he is better than Dylan Gabriel, obviously the Browns didn't think he was. But if he
Hmm.
comes in here and he is, and he becomes the starter, and he becomes, what everybody was hoping for, I think you're going to look like a genius here.
Right.
And
Right.
let me also point this out. Andrew Berry looks at these guys as assets, and a quarterback is the number one asset. If Gabriel shows up and plays well, and Sanders shows up and plays well, you got 2 young assets, and you can trade one to a quarterback needy team this year, this time next year, or whatever, or keep them both, and go with if you draft another one. But as far as, there's not a lot of risk here, but you have an asset, and you get a year down the road, or who knows, even 6 months, an injury occurs, and you can swing a trade of Pickett or Flacco or one of these guys before the final cuts and pick up a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick for next year.
Yeah. A quarterback who looks like he has potential is a very important asset. And you know how you make the most of these athletic assets, Fred? You get them some core home fitness, of course. You
I'm sure
get them
they're
in
on
good
them.
shape. What? What's that?
I'm sure they're on them right now.
I'm just absolutely sure that they are using the world's best adjustable dumbbells, nothing but the best for the Cleveland Browns. I don't know for a fact they are, but let's just assume, because these are the best adjustable dumbbells on the market, rated by everyone. You've heard me talk about it week after week. These are the best items. They also have some other stuff on their website. If you check them out at corehomefitness.com, they've got all kinds of videos showing you how to use this stuff, all kinds of videos about health. They have other products like the Glute Drive Plus. They have the racks. They have the benches. These guys have everything you need to bring the gym home and just kick butt in 2025. So again, check out corehomefitness.com for the ultimate in home fitness equipment. They've stepped up to sponsor the OBR, and they rock. I tell you what, Fred, I had little slides for every single one of the players we drafted. I was going to walk through them, but we're already all over the place talking about Shadur and Quinshawn and all this sort of stuff. So hang on a second. Dennis wants to know if Core Home delivers to Charlotte. Yes, they do. This is an international company, and Charlotte's part of the United States even. So, piece of cake for these guys. All right. So let's dive into questions, and maybe we'll go back and talk about these guys specifically later on. So keep hitting us up with questions. One transaction we haven't talked about yet is the signing of Deontay Johnson, wide receiver, and the subsequent loss of Elijah Moore, who is now signed with the Buffalo Bills. So losing Moore, gaining the other receiver. How are you feeling about the wide receiver room right now, Fred?
Well, I mean, I spent the weekend talking with Cedric Tillman, and I had a story, this week for our subscribers, kind of breaking a little bit of news with him. But I like him a lot. I think he really has the potential to break out and be a legitimately number 2, even though he thinks he can be a number 1. But I don't like that they haven't brought in anybody, in the draft, and now you lost Elijah Moore. He wasn't great, but he was your 3rd leading receiver last year. He had 61 catches. So I assumed that they were going to bring him back, especially when we found out that there was a tender of some sort and it was like 3.5 million. I thought it meant you would get a chance to match it. And I was surprised to see that the Bills were offering him like 5 million. But I thought the Browns would still have it, but evidently not. So you lose him. You bring in Deontay Johnson. We all know he was very good. He went to Pro Bowl. I don't know what happened last year. The guy from a distance seemed that he wasn't fitting in wherever he was, and it seemed like there was some problem with him. I remember with Kenny Pickett, when he was the quarterback with the Steelers, he was upset he wasn't getting the ball. He was kind of like doing the George Pickens thing. And then they moved on from him. And he kind of bounced around last year. I think Carolina and I think Ravens. And I think it was like 3 teams he was with in a short period of time. Texans. So I'm a little concerned, that I know that he might be looking at this as his last chance. But we've seen guys before that had the last chance, like Antonio Brown, different ones like that, and they kind of melted down as well. So I'm not totally counting on this guy right now. So I don't know what your options are after the draft, who's still available, but you really have no depth at all. I mean, you got, if Judy gets hurt or Tillman gets hurt at wide receiver, I think you got Michael Woods, who's still in the route, Jamari Thrash, David Bell coming off a big injury. So you don't really have a room that I would say is striking fear in opponents.
Right. Well, Johnson had some very good statistics, but last year hopefully was sort of a humbling experience for him, and he'll come back stronger. We'll see. But we do have some questions here that I think are appropriate to this particular topic. One of them involves a draft pick we haven't talked about yet tonight, a draft pick I really like, which is Harold Fannin of Bowling Green. The thought here from Kelly, and some of the statistics back it up, some of the analytics back it up in terms of rookie tight ends, but is feeling that we need a little bit more help at tight end, and is suggesting trading for tight end from the Eagles. What's your perspective on that, Fred? Do you think this team needs another top flight tight end?
Well, this guy was one of my picks as well. I think that he can really be productive. I see him as a receiver, so you might be able to work him in as a receiver and help out the wide receiver room. But yeah, I don't know about blocking. It'll probably take him a little time to adapt to that role. But yeah, if you could get Dallas Goedert, I think that I am assuming with Stefanski going more to a run first and a play action offense, what he ran his first 4 years, that they need multiple tight ends. I mean, Jordan Akins was a free agent as far as I think he's still available, and it would seem to be a fallback option. He's familiar with he had 40-some catches last year. He's about the only notable one I'm available. If you could trade and get Goddard, for a pick, or Michael Mayer, I know that the Raiders still want to talk or keep him, but maybe they would move on since they have Brock Bowers. But yeah, I think that if you can't get the wide receiver, if there's not a veteran, that could fit in here, then a tight end would be the next best thing, because that could be your young quarterback's best friend, or even Joe Flacco's a dump down to the tight end. We saw how Njoku really took off when Joe Flacco was the quarterback a couple years ago. and he knows how to get the ball there if he's the quarterback, or even if it's Pickett or one of the rookies. So, yeah, I think tight end, if you can get a better receiving tight end than maybe what's available in the wide receiver market, you go that route and just play 2 or 3 tight ends and not so heavy on the wide receivers.
Right. And World's Fastest points out that Jack Duffin from the OBR pointed out that idea. This AM, he talked about trading Newsome for him. Obviously good relationship between the Eagles and the Browns front offices with Roseman and Berry. Complementary needs, similar dollars. Maybe it'll work. There's some skepticism in the chat room that the Eagles will ever trade that tight end. But, would that seem like an acceptable cost to you to help our tight end room, giving up a little bit at cornerback?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't really address cornerback. I don't think right now the plan is to give Greg Newsome multi-millions. I think it's going to kind of be the Jedrick Wills situation. He's playing on the 5th-year option for $13 million. I thought there was a pretty good chance they would trade him on draft day on like the 3rd day, but they didn't. So with that $13 million guaranteed, you're probably now going to have to, eat some of the cost unless you just let him play out the year, because you got to pay him anyway until you got a better option. We don't know if they feel better about Cameron Mitchell or Miles Harden compared to Newsome. But if you move on from him, they have to be your 3rd corner. So unless you got a better option, you sign a veteran or somebody that's better than him. I don't think you just get rid of him if you don't have somebody to replace him that's better.
Right. Fumble 13 suggests Amari Cooper. He's still around. You think Amari Cooper still has it to come back to the Browns? Obviously, he worked well with Flacco.
Yeah, I would think you'd have good memories. He said he wanted to finish his career with the Browns last summer after he, had that offseason. He had a little holdout, and he admitted he wasn't going to hold out because he just doesn't want to hold out. He kind of lost a lot of leverage, But boy, I just can't believe that the Bills didn't really use him. And we saw what he did with Flacco. I mean, he had that 265-yard game against the Texans, franchise record. And, he was just like, I just can't believe that at 29 or 30 that he's just totally a bust now. I almost go out to say that he's probably better than some of the guys they got on the roster now. And
right.
And if he's willing to come in on a very friendly contract, he might now be just holding out, because he's now what I always talk about. You hit that era where you're the year-to-year 30-something wide receiver that's kind of like a rent-a player. You've seen it you saw it with Julio Jones. You saw it with DeAndre Hopkins. You still see it with him. So it seemed like he had a pleasant experience, and you could almost do the same thing with him. The Browns came out well in that trade. I mean, they got a 3rd-round pick, and he didn't really even hardly play for the Bills. I think the pick was 94, and I think that's the pick with Dylan Gabriel. So it might be their franchise quarterback. Who knows? But, yeah, I think Cooper, to me, might be one of the best options of available free agents. Now, maybe they looked at him or talked to him before they signed Deontay Johnson, and maybe Cooper's still asking for a lot more money. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, we haven't heard much about any negotiations between the Browns and Amari Cooper. So far as we know, they haven't even talked. Let's go to another position, running back. This is from Ty Sox 15. With the strong running backs drafted, do you expect Chubb back on a veteran minimum deal to replace Ford at $3.4 million?
Well, this is such a PR thing. I mean, it's got to be more than PR, but I've said it. I wrote a story about it. I know this has nothing to do with on the field, but last year he was clearly coming off a major injury and he rushed for 300 and some yards. Only 3.3 yards a carry, but he was pretty good in goal line situations. He should be much better. We saw videos. Now he's squatting what he used to, 600 pounds. He only needs 300 and some yards to pass Leroy Kelly. Why in the world wouldn't you let him come back, pass Leroy Kelly? Even if this is his final year in Cleveland, he'd sit all time between two Hall of Famers, Jim Brown and Leroy Kelly. He'd be the second best back in your history. And you don't have a lot of downside risk. I said this before, get a running back, a young running back, maybe two, and they did. They got two studs. I was expecting like 5th, 6th, 7th round or even undrafted running backs. They got two really good ones.
Right.
And you got Ford. You bring Chubb back. You got 4 in training camp. If you don't want to keep 4 or one gets hurt, you still got 3. But if you don't want to keep 4, you can trade one or you can cut one. And you're talking about money? Yeah, Jerome Ford, Jack Duffin pointed this out. He played so much, he hit an escalator where his salary went from like very reasonable to $3.4 million. So you can save money because Chubb, I think the veteran qualifying offers, like he would get like $3 million, but it only counts like half of that against the salary cap. Like 1.5 million. So, and at the end of the year, if Chubb doesn't have it, okay, he retires and you still got 2 really good running backs, or you re-sign Ford or whatever. He's in the last year of his contract. So that's where I don't think the 2 running backs preclude him from bringing Nick Chubb back. It might be in his court now. They might have said, here's our offer. Do you want to come back or not? And if he's holding out, the only other free agent I think that was available was J.K. Dobbins, another Buckeye. But I read that he got the same type of thing that Elijah Moore did, like a tendered offer. Now we saw that doesn't matter, that a team can offer him more than what he would get to stay with the Chargers. So I don't know. I'm just jaded saying I don't see a lot of downside to bring Nick Chubb back unless they, especially PR wise. I think a lot of the Joe Flacco move at the time was PR. And I think that would be a great move to bring Nick Chubb back, right now. Give a boost to a lot of good feelings all the way around. And what if he is back to what he used to be? He's going to be Judkins and Sampson. He's going to be your bell cow back.
Yeah.
And do you want to take a chance on him going to another team and doing what Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry did? They kind of exploded with their new teams. Then you're sitting there going, oh, wow, we let that guy go. So I don't know what's going on, but I was at that Browns backer banquet over the weekend with Tillman and Aaron Shea, and boy, they were all, that's the number one question. Not quarterback, Nick Chubb. They're going to bring him back. We got to bring him back. We love him.
Right.
And I don't know if the Browns know, the impact that could make just in the goodwill aspect of the whole thing.
Right. And by the way, regarding that Rochester Browns backers banquet, we will have a video tomorrow on YouTube of Cedric Tillman, Aaron Shea, and Mr. Greetham here in that Browns backers banquet. You can hear a little bit from Tillman and Shea themselves. So let's switch gears here, and let's start talking quarterback. Jeffrey Champion wants to know, what are some things you like about Dylan Gabriel, and what does he bring to the quarterback room?
Well, I'm very productive. I mean, they go to the number of starts. I think the guy played at 3 different colleges, at Central Florida, Oklahoma, I think, then Oregon.
Right.
I don't like his size, but when you look at his completion rate, his low interception rate, those are the things that you want. And in Stefanski type offense, it is on getting the ball out quick, not making mistakes. I mean, that's the number one thing that killed the Browns last year was 37 turnovers or something, like 23 interceptions. We could go all day about that. So if you have somebody that can manage and get the ball to your playmakers, that's what he's kind of like a point guard. I think the only thing that I've heard against him is his height. I heard somebody, well, if he was 6'3", he would have been a first-round pick. He would have been one of the well, yeah, he's not 6'3", but he's been able to adapt to that. So very productive. Sometimes these guys, the Doug Flutys of this world, the Drew Brees, they kind of get counted out. Maybe this is that type of guy. I don't think you can count on him to be your franchise quarterback. I've said that all along, that you usually get them guys at the top of the draft, not third round, fifth round, and say, oh, Tom Brady, sixth round. Well, that's interesting on the Shea. I'll say this. Aaron Shea was Tom Brady's roommate at Michigan, and he was drafted in the fourth round of that year, 99 picks before Tom Brady was, He was talking about that. He said, can you believe that? He's the GOAT, and I'm doing title insurance.
Yeah, Aaron Shea had some good plays for the Browns back in the day, but he's not Tom Brady. What I like about Dylan Gabriel, he's got all the intangibles. Like you said, if he was 6'3", he probably would have been a first rounder. But a lot of the success factors you find for successful quarterbacks in the NFL can be found on that slide there. With all those starts, he's had more career starts than any other, top division QB. 72.9% completion rate against pretty good competition, right? A lot of passing yards, a lot of TDs, and not too many interceptions. There's a lot to like there about Dylan Gabriel. At the same time, another guy with very similar statistics, Shadur Sanders, 74% completion percentage, second in the FBS in TDs and completions, a lot of yards picked up. These aren't they, to you, Fred, don't they seem in many ways like similar quarterbacks?
Yeah. And he also had a lot of starts. They don't count the 2 years at Jackson State, but it was like 50 some starts I think he had. I know that, national draft experts, most of them had him as, if not the second best, maybe the third best, and not maybe at the top of the draft. But most of them had him in the first round projection, more in the middle to the late first round or even second round. Now, teams clearly all didn't do that, but I think more with the downslide with him was more of just the persona. They overblown their hand by saying, we're going to go wherever, or it was more the dad, Dion, we're going to pick where we're going to go, we're not going to go anywhere. And, I don't think that went over well, especially that goes over well when you are Eli Manning and you can, maybe, or John Elway, when they kind of dictated where they went. But obviously teams didn't look at that as having that elite quarterback play and say they don't want a backup quarterback or somebody coming in, in that position. And so that's how he was viewed. So I think it's probably a win-win for the Browns, is low risk, but hopefully it really humbled the guy and he's going to start from scratch and be really quiet. He's got talent. Obviously, those stats, I mean, one of the reasons I liked him was the 74%, all-time record in the FBS. I don't care if they're dump-off passes or swing passes or whatever. Get rid of the ball and get it into your playmaker's hands. And so I think he's going to have a chip on his shoulder, because he's even drafted behind Dylan Gabriel, and he knows that, even though when he gets here, it doesn't really matter. It's what you do. But I think we're going to be able to see when he plays and Gabriel plays and Pickett plays, does this guy have it or not? If you say, wow, this, because I can't say I studied. I didn't watch Colorado play week in, week out. I saw the highlights, and I know he's got some faults, but we knew that in this quarterback class. That's why, you know, they were interested in Cam Ward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've already got people talking about trading a quarterback because they've got 4 or 5 if you count Watson. But how do you think these reps get split up in training camp? I mean, every single one of these guys, the 4 guys we've got in camp, Flacco's a possible starter, so you want him to get in rhythm with his receivers. Pickett, deserves a shot. And then you want to see what you have in Gabriel and Sanders. Are there going to be enough footballs to go around, Fred?
Well, I watched, Greenbrier in training camp last year. They had 4. Watson was practicing and Winston was there and DTR, and they had Tyler Huntley. And so there was 4 quarterbacks there. I think there's going to be 4 this year. Everybody presumed Watson was the starter, so he was getting all the reps. I don't think Joe Flacco needs necessarily a lot of look. He came off the couch and threw for 300 yards in 5 of his 6 games.
Right.
I think it's good he's around. He's going to have a much better grasp with the offense and everything. But when you're an 18-year pro, you don't need a lot of work. It's not like, you're learning or starting from scratch. So I think they know what they have with him, the bar. I think it's more Pickett and the 2 rookies. A lot of them in the past, it was totally garbage time with DTR and Huntley and in preseason. I think these will be important games for Pickett and Gabriel and Sanders to show what they can do. And against the other teams, they're going to scrimmage, or practice, I think, with the Panthers and is it the Vikings or the
Eagles?
Eagles. And so you're going to go against the Super Bowl champion and you're going to get good evaluation and those 2 other NFL teams. So, yeah, I think it'll be fine. I mean, I don't necessarily think Flacco's going to have to be out there every play, taking. They know what they have there. But that'll dictate a little bit. We'll be able to see what the pecking order is. I'm expecting it to be Flacco, Pickett, Gabriel, and Sanders when they start practicing in OTAs, 1, 2, 3, 4. But as time goes on, we'll see, who gets a little more work, at the top of the depth chart.
Right. One last question. Obviously, we're going to be at rookie minicamp. Fred, you're going to personally be at rookie minicamp. And Thomas Howard doesn't have a lot of experience with what goes on at rookie minicamp. Wants to know if we can expect any more clarity from that and sort of what goes on at the rookie camp.
Well, they bring in all the draftees as well as all the undrafted, and they usually have some guys that are called tryout players that didn't get drafted or didn't get signed as undrafted. Really, they bring in guys so they have enough to practice. Like in the past, they hadn't really even had a rookie here last year, so they had to bring in some tryout guys, for that. So now you got 2 rookie quarterbacks, but there's usually, I'd say, in the neighborhood of about 30 guys, and so they can have positions and line up and do a little bit. Really, it's orientation to get them ready for training camp. So when they get into training camp or the off-season practices, they know what to do. They're not running around with a chicken with their head cut off. They're more familiar with the setting, and so that's what it's more. I'd almost call it like an orientation. They're not
right.
They're just starting to teach them the plays, but more so practicing. How do we run our practice? What's the order? And where do you go? And that whole thing, and get used to the facility and the training staff and the coaching staff and those type things. So,
right.
Yeah, you're not going to see like tackle football or anything. You're going to just see, them running routes and kind of basic startup, getting oriented to an NFL level training camp.
Right, right. Well, thanks for that highlight view, that high level view of what happens at rookie minicamp. Not going to get a ton of clarity about who's starting where or whatever at a rookie minicamp. It's more for the rookies just to get their feet wet, in the NFL environment. If you're watching this program, if you enjoyed the Draft Cave as thousands of people did over the weekend, please consider purchasing an OBR subscription. I'm going to let you in on a little trick just for the people watching the show. What you do is you buy a monthly subscription that gives you a month to determine whether or not you like it. And then after that month, you get Paramount Plus, because when you're on full price plan, you get Paramount Plus. So what you then do is upgrade to an annual, get a good deal on that, and you can max out the value you get from the OBR. So that's a little trick from the web dork. But please consider an OBR subscription and support all the programming and all the work that we do on the Orange and Brown Report. Fred, that's it for tonight. Thank you once again for your wisdom. And thanks once again to the chat room for all the good questions and all the great commentary that we watch as the show goes on. Good night, everybody. We'll be back next Wednesday.
Thank you.